Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a traveler lost in a deep forest. The trees tower overhead, the shadows stretch long, and the path forward is unclear. The most dangerous thing in that moment is not the forest, it is the voice inside the traveler's mind. The conversations we have with ourselves are among the most powerful forces shaping our lives. Every day, thoughts rise and fall within us like the tide, each carrying the potential to build or break us. The way we speak to ourselves determines the way we see the world, the way we handle difficulties, and ultimately the way we walk with God. It is easy to assume that the most dangerous voices in life come from the outside, from critics, from doubters, from those who misunderstand us. But in reality, the most consistent and influential voice is the one we hear within. Long before others discourage us, we often discourage ourselves. Long before the world speaks defeat, we have already entertained the thought of failure. If a person listens long enough to negative whispers within, those whispers become truth in their mind, even if they are lies. Yet we were never meant to be passive recipients of our thoughts. We have the power to shape our inner dialogue. In the Bible, we are said to take every thought captive, to bring it into obedience to Christ. This means that not every thought deserves a home in our hearts. Not every whisper of doubt, not every echo of past mistakes, and not every wave of fear should be accepted without question. Consider a man standing at the gate of a great city. If he allows every stranger to pass through without scrutiny, soon the city will be overrun with thieves and invaders. But if he stands guard, carefully examining each visitor, the city remains secure. The same is true for the thoughts we allow into our hearts. If we let every fear, every doubt, and every lie take root, soon they will overrun our confidence, our faith, and our joy. But if we become gatekeepers of our own minds, allowing only what is true, noble, and right to dwell within, then we will walk in strength. This is why the words we speak to ourselves matter. The world may call us weak, but in the Bible we are said to be more than conquerors. Fear may whisper that we are alone, but we are assured that God will never leave nor forsake us. Failure may remind us of our past, but the truth declares that old things have passed away and all things have become new. There is great power in hearing truth from our own lips. A child finds comfort in a mother's reassurance. A soldier finds courage in the rallying cry of his commander. And a believer finds strength when he reminds himself of God's promises. If we will begin to speak words of life, if we will declare truth over ourselves, we will see our faith grow, our confidence rise, and our hearts rest in the unshakable foundation of God's Word. All throughout Scripture there is a pattern. Men and women of faith did not merely listen to the voices around them, they spoke to themselves. They did not wait for encouragement to come from the outside. Instead, they stirred their own hearts, reminding themselves of the truth even when circumstances seemed to say otherwise. There is a moment when a man, burdened with loss and surrounded by despair, strengthens himself in the Lord. His city had been burned, his family taken, and those who stood beside him now threatened to turn against him. He could have surrendered to fear, allowed his sorrow to consume him, or accepted defeat, but instead he spoke to his own soul. He reminded himself of who his God was. He lifted himself from despair, not because his situation had changed, but because his perspective did. The same pattern is seen again and again. A woman, suffering for years, presses through the crowd. She does not wait for someone to tell her she will be healed. Instead, she says within herself, "If I only touch the hem of his garment, I will be made whole." Her healing did not begin with the touch. It began with the words she whispered in faith. There is a great secret hidden in these stories. The external world may not always change immediately, but the internal world can shift in an instant when we begin to speak in faith. The walls of a prison could not silence the praises of two men in chains. The weariness of a prophet could not erase the truth he declared over himself. The storm did not drown the faith of a man who chose to walk on water, when he fixed his gaze upon the Word made flesh. This is why the words we speak within are so critical. In the Bible we are said to let the weak say, "I am strong," not because they feel strong, but because truth does not rely on feelings. The soul may grow weary, but in the Bible we are said to bless the Lord at all times, to let His praise continually be in our mouths. This is not a passive act. It is an intentional choice to align our speech with the promises of God rather than the uncertainties of life. The world teaches that strength comes from external validation, from the affirmation of others, from the right circumstances. But the truth reveals something greater. Strength comes when a person chooses to stand on what God has said, rather than what their situation appears to be. The giants in the land did not change, but the ones who believed they could conquer them saw victory. The furnace still burned, but those who spoke in faith walked through the fire unharmed. Those who walked closely with God did not wait for their emotions to lead them. They spoke to their souls, commanded their thoughts, and filled their mouths with truth. And in doing so, they saw the power of God move in ways that human reasoning could never explain. The greatest battles in life are not fought with swords or armies, nor do they take place on open fields. They happen in the quiet places of the mind, in the thoughts that rise and fall throughout the day. The true battlefield is within, where unseen forces war for control over what a person believes, fears, and hopes for. A thought, if left unchecked, can shape a destiny. A single lie, repeated long enough, can become a stronghold. What a person continually meditates on will eventually direct their steps. There is an adversary who does not need to lay a hand on a person to destroy them. He only needs to plant a seed of doubt, fear, or despair and let that seed grow. In the beginning it is just a whisper, small, subtle, seemingly insignificant. But if it is allowed to take root, it will soon wrap itself around the heart, cloud the mind, and weaken the soul. The same voice that once deceived in a garden still speaks today, asking the same question. Did God really say? The moment a person begins to question the truth of what has been spoken over them, the battle turns against them. Yet the power to overcome has already been given. In the Bible, we are said to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. This means that change does not begin with circumstances, nor does it come from the approval of others. It begins within. It begins when the mind is trained to reject lies and embrace truth, when thoughts are held captive and made obedient to the knowledge of God. A person who masters their thoughts will master their life. There was a day when a great warrior stood on the battlefield, yet his greatest enemy was not the army before him, it was the fear within him. His strength was unmatched, his skill unquestioned, but the battle had already been lost in his heart long before the first blow was struck. He saw himself as small, incapable, unworthy, and because he believed this, he lived as though it were true. But there was another, a young shepherd with no armor, no sword, and no reputation. He faced the same enemy, heard the same threats, and saw the same danger, yet he did not allow fear to take root in his heart. He spoke to himself, reminded his soul of past victories, declared the power of God over his situation, and charged forward. One fell in defeat before the fight even began. The other walked in victory because his mind was set on truth. In the Bible, we are said to set our minds on things above, not on earthly troubles. Fear may come, but it does not have to stay. Doubt may whisper, but it does not have to be believed. The battle is not won by sheer willpower, but by speaking truth in the face of every lie, by standing firm when everything else says to fall, and by choosing to see with the eyes of faith rather than the eyes of fear. Many people go through life unaware of the words they repeat to themselves. Long before an action takes place, long before a decision is made, there is a conversation happening within. The mind is constantly absorbing, processing, and replaying words, some true, some false. The problem is that many believers unknowingly echo the enemy's voice rather than God's. They speak words of defeat over themselves, rehearsing their failures, magnifying their weaknesses, and accepting thoughts that were never meant to dwell in their hearts. A person who constantly tells themselves they are not good enough will begin to live as though it is true. One who repeatedly claims they will never overcome will eventually stop trying. It is not always the loudest voices that shape a person, but the ones they allow to settle within them. In the Bible, we are said that life and death are in the power of the tongue. This does not mean words are simply sounds that disappear into the air. They have weight, they have impact, and they have the ability to either build up or tear down. When a report of fear was brought to a nation, an entire generation lost their promise. They saw the land, they witnessed its goodness, yet they believed the words of men rather than the words of God. They repeated phrases of impossibility, convinced themselves of their own weakness, and allowed fear to shape their reality. Only 2 among them refused to speak what others spoke. They held on to the truth, even when surrounded by doubt, and because of that, they entered into what was promised while the rest perished with the words they had declared over themselves. In the Bible, we are said to be strong and courageous, not because of our own ability, but because God goes before us. Yet how often do people contradict this truth by saying they are too weak, too broken, or too far gone? The enemy does not always need to attack directly. He only needs to plant a lie and let the believer repeat it until it becomes their own belief. A person may be physically free, but still live bound because of the chains they have spoken over themselves. There is power in speaking truth, even when feelings and circumstances seem to disagree. A man who sat in darkness for years heard the words, "Rise and walk." He could have argued, he could have listed his limitations, but instead he acted on the truth spoken over him, and strength came to his bones. The storm obeyed the words of the one who spoke peace. The valley of dry bones came to life, not by effort, but by the power of declared truth. In the Bible, we are said to let no corrupt speech come from our mouths. Only what is good for building up, so that it may give grace to those who hear. And if words have the power to build others, how much more do they have the power to build the one who speaks them? The tongue was never meant to be a tool for self-destruction, but a weapon for victory. What is spoken repeatedly will take root, and what takes root will produce fruit, whether good or bad. There is a great mystery in the power of words, especially the words spoken to oneself. Many people drift through life, allowing thoughts to come and go without questioning their impact. Yet words are not harmless. They are seeds planted in the soil of the heart, and in time they bear fruit. If a person constantly speaks defeat, fear, and doubt, they will begin to live according to those words. But if they intentionally speak truth, life, and faith, everything within them begins to align with the power of what has been declared. For 3 days, a challenge stands before anyone willing to take hold of it. To speak only what is good, only what is true, only what God has already said. At first it may feel unnatural, even difficult. The mind is not used to being disciplined in this way. The habit of worry is deeply ingrained, and negative words may feel more comfortable than life-giving ones. Yet, in the Bible we are said to set a guard over our mouths, and keep watch over the door of our lips, and keep watch over the door of our lips. This is not a passive command, but an active discipline, requiring effort, awareness, and commitment. A man once stood in the middle of a valley filled with dry bones. There was no sign of life, no evidence of hope. The natural response would have been to accept what was in front of him, to believe what his eyes saw, and to speak accordingly. But instead, he was given an instruction to prophesy, to speak life where there was none, to command what seemed dead to rise. And as he obeyed, as he declared the words given to him, a transformation took place before his very eyes. The bones came together, flesh formed, breath entered, and what was once lifeless became a vast army. For 3 days, this same power is available to anyone who dares to walk in it. To stand before their own valley and speak not what they feel, not what fear whispers, but what has already been promised. In the Bible, we are said to call things that are not as though they were, not because of wishful thinking, but because faith speaks before sight confirms. Mountains move when words of faith are spoken. The heart is strengthened when truth is declared. Even the soul, when weary, responds when it hears itself speaking words of hope. There will be resistance. The mind will want to return to old patterns. The temptation to repeat past fears and failures will arise. But in the Bible, we are said to resist the enemy and he will flee. Thoughts that do not align with truth can be cast down. Words that do not bring life can be silent. For 3 days, the challenge is to refuse to let anything untrue take root, to replace every lie with the promises of God, and to watch as everything begins to change, not because the world around has shifted, but because the words within have. There is a reason the words spoken to oneself matter so much. The mind is like a field, and words are the seeds planted in it. Whatever is sown will grow, whether good or bad. A person cannot continually speak fear and expect faith to flourish. They cannot declare weakness over themselves and expect strength to rise. In the Bible we are said that, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. This is not just a poetic saying, it is a spiritual reality. The words constantly repeated within shape the very essence of who a person becomes. For 3 days the challenge has been to speak truth, to reject words of defeat, and to align thoughts with the promises of God. But this is not just a temporary exercise. It is an invitation into a new way of living. If a person can discipline their tongue for 3 days, they will begin to see the power of words in their life. If they persist, their entire perspective will shift. The mind will no longer be a battlefield of chaos, but a place of peace. The heart will no longer be weighed down by burdens, but strengthened by truth. A great leader once stood on the edge of promise, tasked with leading a people into their inheritance. He was not told to rely on his strength, nor to trust in his own wisdom. Instead, he was given a simple instruction: to keep the words of truth always on his lips, to meditate on them day and night, to let them shape his thoughts and actions. And with that he was promised success, not because of his own ability, but because he chose to walk in alignment with what had already been spoken over him. There will always be a choice, either to speak what circumstances suggest or to declare what God has already said. The storm may rage, but in the Bible we are said that perfect peace belongs to those whose minds are fixed on the truth. The enemy may accuse, but in the Bible we are said that no weapon formed against us shall prosper. Fear may come knocking, but in the Bible we are said that God has not given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. What the heart believes, the mouth will eventually speak. And what the mouth continually speaks, the heart will begin to believe even more deeply. This is why the discipline of speaking truth is not just for a season, but for a lifetime. A person cannot always control what happens around them, but they can control the words they choose to dwell on. The same voice that once spoke darkness into light, that called forth creation by the power of his word, has given the same authority to his people. If words can shape reality, then what greater transformation awaits those who dare to fill their mouths with the language of faith? For 3 days, the challenge has been to speak truth, to align words with faith, and to reject every lie that seeks to take root. But this is not the end. It is the beginning of a transformed life. The power of words does not fade after a few days. It continues shaping the heart, mind, and future. In the Bible, we are said that the tongue holds the power of life and death. Choose life. Continue speaking truth. Guard your thoughts. Declare God's promises daily. And as you do, you will walk in strength, peace, and the fullness of His purpose.